Let's dive into a scary story about a guy who did some really bad stuff using a dating app for gay people. His name was Stephen Port, but he got famous for all the wrong reasons as the Grindr killer. He did some sneaky stuff, tricking young guys he met on the app into coming to his place. Then, he'd give them too much of a drug called GHB, which made them really sick or even killed them. It's super sad, but between June 2014 and September 2015, he did this to 4 guys named Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor. What makes it even worse is that the police didn't catch on until after the 4th guy died. People got really mad because they thought the police should have figured it out sooner. Some folks even said the police didn't take it seriously because the victims were gay, which caused a lot of anger and distrust toward the police. Stephen Port, a portrait of the killer. Stephen John Port's origins trace back to a tranquil corner of Essex County, where he was raised by his parents, Joan and Albert Port. Amidst rumors about his father's sexuality, Port's upbringing seemingly lacked any indications of abuse. However, his early years hinted at a fascination with the male gender, possibly influenced by familial dynamics. Described as a loner during his schooling years, Port endured relentless bullying, shaping his isolated and peculiar demeanor. Despite aspirations in art, financial constraints redirected him towards a culinary career, a profession that offered stability, but failed to satiate his unconventional nature. The double life of Stephen Port. Transitioning to independent living in Barking, London, Port's outward facade belied the darkness within. His employment as a chef at a bus depot juxtaposed with his online persona, where he prowled various platforms to ensnare his victims. Fabricating elaborate falsehoods about his background, including claims of an Oxford education and military service, Port orchestrated a web of deceit to lure unsuspecting young men. The dichotomy between his real and virtual selves epitomized his duplicitous nature, concealing his sinister intentions beneath a veneer of normalcy. The deadly encounter. GHB and deception. Port's modus operandi revolved around the administration of GHB, a potent date rape drug, during sexual encounters. Reports surfaced of his extensive messaging to numerous men on dating apps like Grindr, with witnesses attesting to the youthfulness of his visitors, raising suspicions of pedophilic inclinations. The drug's effects, known for enhancing sexual experiences, served Port's nefarious desires, amplifying the intensity of his encounters while concealing his victims' inability to resist. The revelation of his heinous acts sent shockwaves through the community, exposing the dark underbelly of online interactions and the perilous consequences of unchecked deception. Unveiling the truth. Lessons learned. Stephen Port's chilling saga serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the dangers lurking within the digital realm and the vulnerabilities inherent in human nature. The failure of law enforcement to recognize the pattern of violence earlier underscores the need for vigilant scrutiny and proactive measures to safeguard vulnerable communities. As the investigation unfolded, it unraveled a web of deceit and manipulation, shedding light on the insidious nature of Port's crimes and the devastating impact on his victims and their families. In the aftermath of tragedy, the quest for justice remains an ongoing pursuit, fueled by the collective resolve to prevent such horrors from recurring in our society. Stephen Port and Grindr. The modus operandi. Stephen Port's heinous crimes revolved around exploiting the anonymity of Grindr, a popular dating app, and utilizing a deadly substance, GHB. This colorless, odorless liquid, notorious for inducing unconsciousness and amnesia, served as Port's tool for incapacitating his victims without their knowledge. By discreetly slipping it into their drinks, Port could render them defenseless, paving the way for his sinister intentions. The disturbing obsession and initial assault evidence from Port's laptop revealed a disturbing fixation on adult films depicting sexual encounters where one party was unconscious. In 2012, Port acted upon these fantasies, targeting his first known victim, a 19-year-old university student he met on Grindr. After inviting the victim to his apartment and drugging him, Port proceeded to sexually assault him while he lay incapacitated. Though the victim survived, Port's depravity remained unchecked. Escalation and evading justice. Port's predatory behavior escalated, with subsequent victims recounting similar experiences of drugging and sexual assault. Despite victims coming forward, including one who reported repeated assaults to the police, Port continued to evade justice. Even when caught with a victim in a state of severe distress at a train station, concrete evidence of sexual assault remained elusive. Port's cunning manipulation of substances and victims allowed him to slip through the cracks of the legal system repeatedly. The tragic turn. Murder. Port's descent into murder began with Anthony Walgate, a struggling fashion student whom Port lured with the promise of payment for sexual services. Injecting him with a lethal dose of GHB, Port callously assaulted him, indifferent to whether he lived or died. Anthony's lifeless body was callously disposed of outside Port's apartment, disguised as a drug overdose. Despite glaring inconsistencies, including Anthony's positioning and attire, authorities initially dismissed foul play, leaving his family bereft and frustrated. A mother's fight for justice. Sarah Sack, Anthony's grieving mother, refused to accept the narrative of her son's accidental death. Despite police indifference and initial reluctance to investigate further, Sarah's relentless pursuit of truth eventually led to Port's arrest. Through her tenacity and unwavering belief in her son's innocence, Sarah challenged the complacency of law enforcement, shining a light on the overlooked clues and negligence surrounding Anthony's case. The Stephen Port murders. Stephen Port, the notorious serial killer, initially evaded detection through cunning manipulation and calculated deception. His first victim, Anthony, allegedly brought GHB, a lethal drug, to use with Port, only to die in his presence, purportedly out of panic. Port, in a bid to cover his tracks, promptly contacted the authorities, feigning innocence. However, a more thorough investigation could have unraveled Port's fabric of lies. Anthony had no prior history of GHB or drug use, a fact overlooked in the rush to accept Port's narrative. Had law enforcement delved into Port's background, they would have uncovered alarming accusations from 2012, where he was accused of sexually assaulting men and engaging in drug use. Regrettably, these allegations were not pursued at the time, and Port was merely charged with misleading the police, escaping more serious consequences. Even when Port's laptop was seized, a critical oversight occurred as authorities failed to examine it promptly, missing crucial evidence of Port's sinister activities. This negligence allowed Port to continue his deadly spree, claiming another victim, Gabriel Cavari, a recent immigrant to the UK, who fell prey to Port's lethal concoction of GHB and sexual assault. Gabriel Cavari's tragic fate. Gabriel Cavari, a young man seeking a fresh start in the UK, crossed paths with Stephen Port, unknowingly sealing his fate. Despite his brief time in England, Gabriel found himself in a relationship with Port, believing him to be a friend. However, Gabriel's trust was shattered when Port administered a fatal dose of GHB, robbing Gabriel of his life and dignity. Port callously attempted to conceal his heinous act, deceiving Gabriel's friends into believing he had left the country. Gabriel's body, positioned to mimic sleep, was discovered in a cemetery, a macabre scene orchestrated by Port. Despite being under police surveillance, Port's actions went unchecked, raising questions about law enforcement's perception of him as a threat. Gabriel's death, initially deemed unexplained, mirrored Anthony's demise, yet authorities failed to connect the dots, dismissing concerns raised by Gabriel's loved ones. Sarah Anthony, grieving the loss of her son, sought answers, only to be met with indifference, highlighting a systemic failure to apprehend Port and prevent further tragedy. Daniel Whitworth's untimely end. Daniel Whitworth, a young chef with aspirations, met Port under unsuspecting circumstances, only to meet a grisly fate. Injected with a lethal dose of GHB and subjected to sexual assault, Daniel became another victim in Port's sinister scheme. Port, adept at covering his tracks, staged Daniel's death to resemble a suicide, further obscuring the truth. Despite the discovery of a chilling note implicating Port, authorities failed to scrutinize the evidence closely, allowing Port to evade justice once more. Daniel's family, refusing to accept the official narrative, challenged the police's conclusions, revealing inconsistencies overlooked in the investigation. Their persistence, coupled with the accidental discovery of incriminating footage, finally unraveled Port's facade, leading to his eventual arrest and conviction. Justice prevails. Stephen Port's reign of terror culminated in his conviction for multiple counts of murder, sexual assault, and administering poison. Despite his attempts to appeal his sentence, justice prevailed, condemning Port to life imprisonment. However, the investigation exposed glaring flaws within the Metropolitan Police, characterized by incompetence, negligence, and systemic failures. The families of Port's victims, resilient in their pursuit of truth and accountability, demanded answers, highlighting the devastating consequences of institutional apathy. While Port's conviction provided closure for some, it served as a stark reminder of the imperative to reform law enforcement practices and uphold justice for all. Lessons learned. The Stephen Port case serves as a cautionary tale, underscoring the dire consequences of investigative negligence and institutional shortcomings. The Metropolitan Police's failure to recognize the gravity of Port's crimes and act decisively reflects systemic deficiencies in training, supervision, and protocol. While efforts have been made to address these deficiencies, much remains to be done to restore public trust and ensure accountability. By acknowledging past failures and implementing meaningful reforms, law enforcement can honor the memory of Port's victims and prevent future tragedies. Media representation and impact. The Stephen Port case has garnered widespread media attention, sparking discussions about police misconduct, institutional homophobia, and the complexities of criminal justice. Documentaries, dramas, and investigative reports have shed light on the case, prompting critical reflection on systemic failures and societal attitudes towards marginalized communities. As the legacy of Port's crimes endures, it serves as a sobering reminder of the enduring quest for truth, justice, and accountability in the face of adversity. Subscribe for more chilling cases.